Man who writes the MMQB for Sports Illustrated, Albert Breer, back here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Albert?
I'm good. Got to have your head on a swivel for Bill these days, huh?
Well, I mean,
it's amazing. It's amazing.
As I said, Albert, there's a new cryptocurrency in the NFL, and it's called Billcoin. And I didn't see this one coming. I knew they had a ton of cap space, and they might be active, but not like the leader in the clubhouse by far and away. What do you owe this spending spree to, Albert Breer?
Well, I think first of all, it's sort of a recognition that they hadn't drafted well a few years ago. And if you look at it, like 2015, 16, 17, 18. Really just didn't do a good job, which is how this cap space was generated in the first place, because if you don't have anybody in your own roster to pay, then you're going to wind up with this sort of vacuum. I think it's partially that. I think it's an acknowledgement that they've messed up with even more recent draft picks like N'Keal Harry and the 2 tight ends they took last year, and that they need to move to fix those positions quickly. And then I think it's also just a acknowledgement that they're going to have to do things a little bit differently without Tom Brady as their quarterback. And I think over 20 years they got in such a comfort zone where no matter what was going wrong, they could find a way to work around it. And whether offensive line issues, Brady gets rid of the ball quicker. Receivers who can't separate, he's going to be a little bit more accurate. Defense that can't play, well, we're cool getting into shootouts because we have 12. All of that, I think there's like an acknowledgement that now they have to build a little bit differently, and they have to be a little bit more aggressive, and they don't have the crutch of Brady anymore. And so, I think there was, in a lot of ways, a reckoning in 2020. I think a lot of things that maybe they believe to be true wound up being a little bit more rickety than they would have expected they'd be.
And so, are they done? Like what more move? No. What other moves are remaining? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you Leonard Fournette's name. I know he's one they've kicked tires on, and I think they're in it with the Bucs and the Seahawks on him. And then I think the obvious thing that's sort of kind of hovering over everything is the quarterback. And I don't think they're done at quarterback. Now, I can't tell you whether or not that's going to be a veteran or a draft pick. I think they'll take someone in the draft regardless at some point. The question is where. But I think that they definitely, if Jimmy Garoppolo were to become available, they would definitely be involved in that. Who knows what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson. And then if this isn't taken care of by the draft, I think you probably look at them taking someone somewhere in the first 3 rounds. And maybe if they fall in love with one of the guys in the first round. I don't think it's any surprise that Cam Newton's back for 2020. They felt like he was very hamstrung by what was around him last year and wanted to give him another chance. I felt like all along what would be the real surprise is if they brought him back without any real competition. So I think the real competition is coming. The question is going to be from where.
And, I started the show by saying that free agency once again has given us a season-long storyline arc to follow, which is will this work out for the Patriots? I mean, how's it going to work out with 4 new parts in Aguilar and Bourne and Smith and Henry for a quarterback that, despite his his MVP, abilities on his resume, last year was still, referred to as a steep learning curve. I mean, how does this all get put together is definitely a storyline of 2021 that I did not see coming into free agency 2 days ago. It's amazing.
And it's going to be interesting because I do think, they took the circumstances of last year into account. Like I said, they didn't put a lot around him, and I think they felt like he could have been better if he had a little bit more around him. So that's a factor. Obviously, the pandemic, just changed the dynamic for everybody. Cam himself got COVID and didn't play very well after that, and that's just a fact. And they also, they didn't sign him until July 1st. So, forget not being able to go in the building. He wasn't on the team in April and May and June, so they didn't get a chance to know him or build an offense around him until the summer. So think all those things are factors. And, what's so interesting to me about, the way that they've sort of went to rebuild the offense, look how tight end centric it is. Okay. I mean, I can tell you on good authority that what sold to Jonnu Smith and to Hunter Henry, in getting both of those guys to come there, because you would think, like, if you were one of those guys and, if you're Hunter Henry and Jonnu signs there, well, why would you go there? What they sold those guys was, this is going to be an offense that's like the one we ran in 2010 and 11 and 12 when we had Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. And like, I think the flip side of that, and this is where you see a little synergy with the team and the player. Who was Cam's most trusted target in Carolina for all those years?
Greg
Who was
Olsen.
the one guy he couldn't do without?
Greg Olsen.
Greg Olsen.
Yeah.
Right. So I do think that, I mean, look, like, I can't tell you Cam Newton's going to be the starter week one. Again, I think he's going to have to compete for it. But, if you look at it and you look at the way the offense is built now around the tight ends, you could certainly see where it would probably be a little bit more comfortable one for Cam to play in than what he played in last year.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. Let's talk Steelers, Albert. This fascinates me because Bud Dupree hit it. Did he hit it? And we were all concerned about him being able to hit it because of his blown-out knee, late in the stages of last year. And he's winding up on Tennessee with that contract. And Juju we're all expecting to see go. And Pouncey retires, but Ben returns. What is this team going to be looking like? Because I'll tell you right now, I would place a bet, figuratively, of course, being an NFL employee. I would place my belief in the Patriots to have a better season than the Steelers as we're sitting here right now. What do you got for me on that front?
I think it's a fair thing to look at, like, that those two teams have sort of, I think that, you could look at the Steelers and say maybe they're descending a little bit, and obviously after everything the Patriots have done, they're ascending a little bit. I look at, like, what the Steelers are doing as sort of they're moving in this period where they're going to have to sort of pay some of the guys that they have assembled over the last few years, and I think guys that were really responsible for the 11-0 start last year. And so, going forward, what do you do about Minkah Fitzpatrick? Well, you're going to have to pay him. What are you going to do about T.J. Watt? He should get a monster contract, right? I think we can all agree on that.
Right.
So you see some of the pieces, the younger pieces that they've hit on that allowed them to start the way they started last year. And, I think this is sort of a period of transition where the core is changing from guys to, like, Ben, like Stefan Tuitt, like Cam Hayward, that have been there forever. Now more towards guys like Watt, guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, guys like Devin Bush, who I think they still have very high hopes for, even though he got hurt last year. And so I think Ben is in an interesting spot in that, at his age, I think you'd like your team to be all in, but because of where the Steelers are logistically, it's a little bit of a time of transition for them where, I really do think that this is, in 2 or 3 years, it's going to be Minkah Fitzpatrick, T.J. Watt, Devin Bush's team.
No, I hear you, but this is Big Ben's last year, and
right. That's the thing about it.
You got to, yeah. So I mean, I know you're talking down the road, but we're talking 2021, a world in which the Chiefs went and got Joe Thuney to protect Mahomes, which I thought was an outstanding maneuver on their part, and they are going to reconfigure their line so it doesn't look like Super Bowl 55 for all 17 weeks next year. And then you're looking at obviously what the Ravens and the Browns have in your own division, in your own house, right? So this is it. This is where rubber meets road. If they had to have some sort of Rooney Roethlisberger Yalta summit to just make this 1 year work, you got to figure that this is it. Don't you have to go now, right? I mean, and I understand what you're saying, but they weren't quite as strapped as, like, say, the Saints or the Eagles were coming in, but to the league year. But they weren't that far off, and I'll add to that, like, Kevin Colbert's year to year very much now. I mean, he's been upfront about that, right? Like, every year he signs a 1 year extension, and the question is whether or not he's going to be back. Mike Tomlin's now been there. Believe it or not, this year will be his 15th year.
he's going to have been there now as long as Bill Cowher was there.
How about that?
So, I do think, it just made you feel old there, didn't I?
It's just amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I look at it and I think this is just sort of the way the Steelers have always operated, where they don't really go and pounce on other people's free agents. And when they do, they're very selective. And they've hit on some of those guys, like Joe Hayden. That's one they really hit on, right? And he's come in and helped shore up a real trouble spot for them. So you see some of the things that they've done, and really, I mean, this is just their MO. I mean, this is the way they've always operated. This is why they've been who they've been for the last 30 years. And I understand, because of what Tampa's done, Rich, that a lot of people look at it and say, well, if you have an older quarterback, you got to do what Tampa's done, and that's why Aaron Rodgers now is ruffling feathers with the Packers, and why Russell Wilson's ruffling feathers with the Seahawks. The Steelers just operate differently than other teams, and I don't know that Kevin Colbert or Mike Tomlin, even if they are closer to the end than they are the beginning in their time with the Steelers, I don't know that those guys are going to move off of the way that they've done business for a very long time, just because Tampa did things a little bit differently and won a Super Bowl that way.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. So you mentioned Russell Wilson. Look, you got your ear to the ground, as much as anybody else, Albert, and you're very attuned to what you hear more than others. And so you've heard what I've heard too over the last several years, rumors that Russell and the Seahawks aren't really as copacetic as somebody who says "Go Hawks" at the end of every interview, and we've heard that. Now this stuff is out, and nothing happened. You even heard hey, every year for the draft, keep an eye on the Seahawks choosing a quarterback. Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Now though, it's out in the open. Now what we've been hearing rumblings is now flat out in the open. But stop me from from feeling like nothing's going to happen anyway. Because that's the way I feel. It's going to be out in the open. But now this is the ultimate shot across the bow of whatever that means, that he's going to force his way out or demand his way out. It doesn't seem like this is going to happen still. Am I wrong, or are you just keep hearing the Bears are?
What I thought was interesting. We all made a big deal out of Josh, and look, Russell's camp made a big deal out of it too. John Schneider showing up at Josh Allen's pro day. Was it 3 years ago now? 3 years ago now,
yep,
right?
2018.
Yeah, so they made a big deal out of that. And where was John Schneider last Friday? Do you know?
Was he at Trey Lance's?
Yep, he was front and center at Trey Lance's pro day. Now think about this: if he was going to, if he was going to say Ohio State to go see Justin Fields, or Alabama to go see Mac Jones, it's easy to kind of say, okay, well, I was there to see this player or that player. If you're going to North Dakota State, I know they've got a lineman there who's pretty good, but you're probably there to see the quarterback. And so, I just think that and I know John likes to go see all the quarterbacks in person, but to me, I think that's there was something symbolic about that too, which is we're going to operate like we've always operated. And yes, we're going to try to put a really good team around you, Russell, but we're not going to be held hostage by this situation. We're going to kind of move forward. And I really have to believe, Rich, just knowing what I know, that Russell Wilson signed his last contract with the Seahawks. Now, things could change over the next 2 or 3 years. There could be different people in charge for all we know. But I think right now the likelihood is that Russell has signed his last contract with the Seahawks. And then the question becomes, okay, well, then when do they move him? And how does he wind up on another team? And they have 3 years to figure that out, And so I don't think it happens this year, in part because they don't have a first-round pick. They don't have a clear answer on who would be the quarterback after Russell Wilson on the roster, a clear path to that, because they don't have a first-round pick this year. But I certainly think that this is something that's going to linger. And again, I don't think that the Seahawks are going to suddenly go on hands and knees to Russell Wilson and say whatever you want. And I think that John Schneider showing up in Fargo last Friday was as good an illustration of that as any that we've got.
And then what's the latest on Deshaun Watson, if there is one? Our colleague in the NFL media group, your former one, my current one, Jim Trotter, was on the show. I got Steve Weich of the Huddle and Flow podcast on Thursday. Their conversation with David Culley was something else last week, and then Jim dropped here because I said on the show, like, look, if Watson is going to get boxed in, which appears to be one way that he would term it, I would say. And then at some point during the summer, potentially, if it does go that long, they're going to force him to choose between his money and his principles. And that's a spot where no athlete really wants to be. Certainly, if you're going to be portrayed in the media or certain places as something you're not, and so on and so forth. That I asked Jim, like, when's he going to say something publicly to change that narrative? Because he could get out of that box with just one sit-down interview with somebody or one Instagram post, and he's just like, why would he want to say anything? He's not going to win anything by saying anything, and intimated that there's a camera crew following him right now to chronicle this whole thing, and you will hear from him by the time it's over, is what Jim Trotter had to say. What are you hearing about this whole business right now, Albert?
So I got to tell you what other teams are getting when they're calling Nick Caserio, the new general manager.
Please.
There. Nick's basically said to every team that's called, you can ask me about any player but the quarterback. So, like, that's sort of what they're being greeted with. Now, that doesn't mean offers aren't being made. That doesn't mean that Nick, even though he's saying he's not taking offers, isn't writing things down. Like, okay, he said he'd give me this. He said he'd give me that. But right now, his stance to other teams has been, I'm willing to talk about anybody. I'm not willing to talk about trading Deshaun Watson. And so, that leaves you at the stalemate where the team isn't willing to talk about trading the player, and the player doesn't want to play for the team. So, I think, at this point, anybody saying they know what's going to happen, I think there's some guesswork there. But I heard what you heard too, and on Jim and Steve's podcast there that Deshaun did say, or that David Culley did say, he's our quarterback right now. And I think that's significant too, because even if that's a little bit of a slip, that means he's at least thought about or maybe talked about internally with Nick and other people in the building, like what happens if we can't solve this.
Yeah, but how could they not have those conversations, Albert? I mean,
I think they'd have to. Yeah, you'd absolutely have to. And here's the thing. Here's the thing. There's no deadline right now. Like some quarterbacks, like the Jets, I'll give you an example. Like the Jets, if they don't deal Sam Darnold this week, then, maybe that hurts their value a little bit because seats will fill up in other places. I honestly believe this. Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson, their value, supersedes that. Their value, those two guys, their teams can hold on to them, and they won't lose value. They're good enough where other teams will throw their quarterbacks overboard to go and get them. And so, I just don't think that there's any rush to do anything right now. To me, the real pressure point is the draft, because if the Texans get to, if you trade him after the draft, now you're trading him for future draft picks, for future assets, where you don't know if that pick you're trading for is going to be the 10th pick or the 25th pick. If they were to trade him to the Jets or Dolphins right now, you know what? They know, all right, that's a second pick, that's a third pick. We can find his replacement with that pick. So that's why I think the draft is sort of maybe the next important milepost here. I think this week is fairly irrelevant to both, to the value of either guy. Now, teams like the Bears, teams might want you to give them an answer, but I don't think it hurts the Seahawks or Texans to sit on the quarterbacks right now. I think where the Texans have to be looking at going forward, the Seahawks too, would be, we probably should make for the good of our team, for the good of our franchise, for the good of our 2021 season, we probably should be seeking some sort of answer by the time we get to the draft.
I mean, and then at some point, the pieces will maybe stay the same, and if that happens, then guys like Alex Smith and potentially Andy Dalton, unless the Bears jump on him now, right? Trubisky.
Yeah.
There's going to be a glut, right? Wouldn't you say there could literally wind up a glut of quarterbacks, youthful and also highly experienced, that are sitting there saying, "What next?" when it's all said
Sure,
and done.
I agree with that, but I mean, like I think the other thing is too, like, you know, some of these teams have placeholders where, I mean, look, like, you know, Teddy Bridgewater is making $21 million a year. Okay, the Panthers would happily either figure out what to do with that if they could wind up with Deshaun Watson. You know, the Bears have Nick Foles on their roster. Do they think Nick Foles is going to be their week one starter? No, but at least having him there gives you some flexibility going forward. Washington now has Ryan Fitzpatrick there. They think that they're the best team in the division. They have a right to think that because they won the division last year, and they think that they can win the division again with Ryan Fitzpatrick. But if Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson were to become available, would they kick tires on it? Sure. So I do understand what you're saying, where it's like, well, we can't bring this guy or that guy in, when Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson are out there still. I still look at it like, you know, if I'm the Bears, like, for example, because they've been connected to Russell, let's use them, and you're looking at it, you're talking to Andy Dalton. You say to Andy, look, we really like you. We'd love to have you in here. You have a relationship with our offensive coordinator, played for him in Cincinnati. We like a lot of things about you, but you just have to understand that if one of these two other guys become available,
hit the bricks. Hit the bricks. The bricks may be hit.
I mean, like, that's it, right? Like, that's it. But at least you're being honest with the guy then, right? Like, so I personally think there are ways around that. Don't you? I mean, like, it seems like a pretty simple thing.
No, I hear you. Albert, thanks for the time. You're phenomenal, as always. We'll chat soon. You'll be well.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.
You guys, Albert Breer here on The Rich Eisen Show. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.